This is Chapter 6 of 9/11, Act 2. The title of the chapter is Froncie at Harrisburg. The event at Harrisburg was one of those happy accidents that saved lives. It was, however, the result of a chain of good police work by an officer who happened to be at the right place at the right time, recognized the threat, took prudent action that put himself at risk, and almost everything went right for him. Officer Dean Fronce of the small Middletown, PA police force was one who had in 7 years never received a commendation or won any award. He was a solid officer, but was not considered a great one or one that would do anything great. The launch site was not in his jurisdiction. He should have never been within 3 miles of the missile team, and in fact the only reason he was there was a mistaken observation, albeit one that most other officers would admit they could easily have made. Even that mistake could be considered a good piece of police work, even though it was unproductive. It was a clear case of seeing something that looked wrong and checking it. He observed what he thought was 2 men stealing supplies from a construction site and followed them out of town. He put 2 and 2 together, and it didn't add up right. The men were loading the truck when he passed. They were driving a truck without any construction company markings, and there was no work going on at the site. It was a classic material theft. He called in and followed them for just over 3 miles. When they pulled into the construction company site, he pulled in behind them and checked their credentials. They were employees. A manager from the site came out and vouched for them. He explained that one of the company trucks was in the shop. The one man had driven his personal truck to work. They asked him if he would pick up the items, and he and the other worker went out to do it. The officer apologized for the inconvenience. The manager shook his head. "We have had a lot of thefts of everything lately. It is nice to know the police are looking after us. Please, if you ever see anything that looks bad, check. I would rather have to explain like today 10 times than have more thefts. They are robbing us blind, and they only get a few cents on the dollar for the scrap." The officer nodded, got in his car, called in, and started back to his patrol area. One of the other officers heard it and laughed to his partner. "He goes chasing guys who are not doing anything wrong. It seems like if something can go wrong, it happens to Froncie. Yes, we could have made the same mistake, but he was there and it happened to him. Like I said, it happens to him." Dean was driving back to his patrol area when he saw a van along the side of the road. It was in a no trespassing area, and he considered pulling off, but decided to pass. He did not need another fiasco today. It was probably someone who was legitimately there. He noted it was 1:38. After he passed the van, he looked up in the mirror. For a couple of seconds, he saw a man was standing behind the van with what looked like an anti-aircraft missile. He pulled off, made a U-turn, and started back. One more look to be sure, and he was on the radio calling for backup. He mentioned it looked like 2 men with a missile. The officer in the other car shook his head. "Froncie is chasing another red herring. You would have thought he would have learned. It is probably 2 kids with a toy airplane. We will have to buy one and put it above his locker." As he got within 10 yards of the van, he pulled across the road so he could exit his car away from the man. As he got out, he heard a shot, and his left shoulder felt like someone slugged him. He dove behind the car, pulled his pistol, and looked. The man with the missile launcher had it on his shoulder as if to fire it. He called out, Put that missile launcher on the ground and put up your hands." The man did not move, but several bullets hit Froncie's car. He called out again, "Put down the launcher and put up your hands." 2 more shots hit the car. He grabbed the radio and reported, "Officer fired on. Officer wounded." They already had his location. He located the other man, watched till his head come up, and fired. The man pitched back on the ground. He repeated the command, "Put down that missile launcher or I will fire." Again, there was no response. He heard the roar of an aircraft and realized that if this was a real launcher, and if he intended to shoot, the plane would be the target. A lot of people would be dead in a minute. This was a gray area, but he was sure his action was right. He set his sights on the man's upper leg and fired 4 carefully aimed shots. The man fell and dropped the launcher. He called on the radio, "Officer wounded, needs assistance. Both suspects are down. Get an explosive expert out here. The one man had a missile launcher and was going to target a plane." The officer in the other car looked over at his partner. "Let's go see what Froncie mucked up." The noise of the overhead jet blotted out the last line partially. The dispatcher was sure she hadn't heard it right and said, "Repeat that." He repeated, "Officer wounded, needs assistance. Both suspects are down. Get an explosive team out here. The one man had a missile launcher and was going to target a plane. We need 3 ambulances." The officer in the other car looked up. "We're close. Let's go see this toy airplane. Froncie is in big trouble now." Within minutes, 3 more police cars arrived. When the second car arrived, the officer confirmed what Froncie had called in. The officer in an inbound car looked over at his partner. "A blind hog gets an acorn now and then." The area was cordoned off, the road blocked at the intersections, traffic was diverted, and more help was on the way. The airport was notified, and that brought notifications to the FAA, the FBI, the AT, and the NTSB got a heads up. The EMTs checked the one man. He was dead. The EMT who was checking him looked up at his partner. "Like David with Goliath, 1 shot in the middle of the forehead. I didn't think Froncie could do it. And with a bullet in his shoulder, no less." They checked the other man. He was alive. Because of the live ordnance, they quickly put him on a stretcher and carried him about 200 yards from the van. Nobody wanted to be near that live missile. They didn't know at the time there was a second one in the van. He was bleeding really bad from the upper legs. There were 4 small entrance wounds and 2 very large exit wounds on the left leg and 2 very ugly entrance wounds on the right. The bleeding looked nasty, and 2 tourniquets were administered very high on the legs. The female EMT looked up. "Just like David, 5 stones. 1 for the other guy, 4 for this one. I think the other guy got off easy. He went to Allah and the 57 virgins, and he won't have any pain. We need to get this guy in soon, or he will be there too." The other EMT team was checking the officer. He had a nasty through wound on his shoulder. They put a pressure pad on the front and back to slow the bleeding, and they transported him to the hospital. The ER closed the wounds. 2 hours later, he was in a hospital bed, fussing that he was fine and could go back to work. There were more bad guys out there who needed his attention. He had proven he could still handle his weapon after being shot. He was obviously hopped up on painkillers and adrenaline. His wife and the police chief assured him that he had done enough for today. He kept saying, "There has to be more of them. I only got 2 of them." His wife and the chief knew he was right. He had taken 2 of the terrorists off the street. There had to be at least 58 more for the sights. What they had not figured out yet was the 30 backups. Later, the airport security would determine the 2 flights that were saved. There were 305 people on those flights. Froncie would get a commendation for that event, and later a letter of thanks came from the construction company president. It included a $500 check to the Police Benevolent Fund in Froncie's name. Somehow Froncie's luck changed. By the end of the year, he had gotten the award from MAD twice for the highest number of DUI convictions, and 1 from DARE for arrests of 2 major drug dealers that were based on his work. The one man he shot, of course, was dead. The other man's left leg was amputated at the hip because they could not stop the bleeding. It was either due to a hip disarticulation or he would die. The bone in his right leg was broken near the head of the femur. It was pinned. He would have a long recovery on his way to jail.